Welcome to the Wilson Center for those who are here in person and those watching online. I am Jonathan Majuk, and I direct the Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative here at the Wilson Center. The Wilson Center is a congressionally chartered think tank that focuses on global issues through independent research and nonpartisan analysis. And so we bring the world of public affairs and the world of academia together and focus on issues that matters. One of them is forced displacement, and right now the world is just at a crossroads everywhere. And the crisis we hear displace people from their homes. But amid all of this, today, we are going to focus on something to celebrate. This special event recognizes two host countries for their exemplary leadership in hosting refugees and ensuring their self-reliance. And that is important for those who have been forced to leave their home to have a place they call home and also to rebuild their livelihoods. And so here is how we're going to go. Following a keynote speech, there will be a presentation of the awards. And we'll go to two countries, Moldova and Uganda. After the award presentation, we have the award recipients on behalf of their respective countries give some few remarks. After that, I'm going to call the speakers to have a panel conversation here on the stage. But thank you for joining us. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Today's keynote speaker is the Honorable Michelle Beckering. She is currently serves as National Engagement Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Before that, Beckering served at the U.S. Agency for International Development as Assistant Administrator. She was appointed by the President and unanimously confirmed for her position. She is a key leader and was a key leader in implementing efforts to modernize foreign assistance, including the agency's approach to private sector engagement. A passionate advocate for women's empowerment and equality, Beckering was a leading architect of the White House-led Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. We are very delighted to have you, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Michelle Beckering.
Well, I have to say it's an honor to be here at the Wilson Center again, and I want to thank Ambassador Green, first and foremost, a longtime boss and mentor of mine, and appreciate all he is doing here at the Wilson Center. And specifically, of course, Jonathan, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for inviting me to speak here today on this issue. I really have to acknowledge all of the work of you and your team on the Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative, and really acknowledge all that you have been doing in this space to inform a global conversation around forced displacement and refugee issues. Your program has been so instrumental in bringing together policymakers, scholars, practitioners, all of us here represented in this room, to have a constructive and candid dialogue that has shaped innovative policies and effective responses to the challenges we're facing in this sector. Particularly, though, it's been successful in crafting those long-term solutions that are ensuring that both refugees as well as the host communities can thrive, something that can be very difficult in those circumstances. And today, it is really an honor to be here, particularly with Your Excellencies from Moldova and Uganda, to recognize the critical role that refugee hosting nations like your own are playing around the world. They're providing safety, stability, an opportunity for those fleeing conflict and persecution, while also acknowledging that there is a strain, right, that this puts on host communities who are also caring for their own people. I myself, as you heard from your introduction, have spent most of my career in the international development field. And I've seen the sort of the push and pull of this issue firsthand, right? Going across the world, not only visiting refugee camps, which are always such a very, emotional experience, talking to those who have fled persecution, other abuses, and who are now being taken care of by host countries, meeting with the governments of those countries, the other leaders who are providing that life-saving assistance, like NGOs, faith-based communities, the private sector, et cetera, and really coming together to the solutions of how we address the critical immediate needs while also looking forward to how can this become a more self-reliant, self-sustaining solution. And we know the challenges around the world are really great. Today, it's roughly 2 billion people who live in conflict-affected countries. And that leads to around 122 million people around the world who have been forcibly displaced due to a variety of reasons, as I've already mentioned: war, conflict, persecution, human rights violations. So if you think about that number, right, that's 120 million families, it's children, it's communities, all who have been displaced and forced to leave everything behind. If we also look at the statistics with these 122 million displaced people, almost 70% of these refugees settle in directly neighboring countries, right? And oftentimes, when we look at where many of these refugees are coming from, when we look at that geographical area, we recognize that often the host communities themselves, these neighboring countries, right, have limited resources and are also facing their own development challenges. In fact, today, the latest statistic is that it is low and middle income countries that host 71% of all the world's refugees. What do we know? We know that host communities demonstrate extraordinary generosity in hosting these refugees and helping them find solutions to their immediate needs. But those immediate needs, which are so important in life-saving, medical care, food, and housing, beyond that, we are increasingly seeing, thanks to programs like the one that you're overseeing here, Jonathan, and thanks to host countries, like we'll talk about today, Moldova and Uganda, right? Countries who are working in close partnership with other partners, primarily becoming the private sector. And they're working together, and this has led to both investments as well as policies that are going beyond that emergency sort of life-saving assistance to really looking forward to what are the next steps, right? How do we provide refugees with self-reliance skills, education, skills training, access to employment? How can we really help refugees contribute significantly to their host communities, economically, socially, and culturally? And so today that brings us here, where we're going to recognize two such countries who have done this, Moldova and Uganda, with the Wilson Center's Refugee Host Country Leadership Awards. And it's really, I think, important to note as we look at this model that these are two countries from very different regions with very different sets of circumstances. We start with Moldova, and we look at the situation there. As many of you know, in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Moldova, a country with only a population, I understand, of 2.5 million people, opened its doors to hundreds of thousands of its neighboring Ukrainian refugees. And at the height of the crisis, it is really important to note that Moldova hosted one of the highest refugee populations per capita in all of Europe. The Moldovan government, alongside civil society and their international partners, worked swiftly to provide shelter, food, and medical care for the Ukrainian families and the children displaced by war. Moldovan communities opened their own homes, and people volunteered to provide all kinds of their very own products, food, and services. And I think many of you who have followed social media remember years ago seeing those pictures. And I remember very poignantly seeing pictures that said, you know, house is open, we can host 4, we can host 6, we can host 2. And how much that touched so many of us around the world just to see ordinary citizens saying, come here, we will give you everything that we have. I then want to turn to Uganda. Uganda is right now the largest refugee hosting country in Africa and one of the largest hosts in the world, actually, writ large. currently sheltering over 1.7 million refugees, primarily from, again, Africa, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Somalia, and Burundi. Uganda also has one of the strongest refugee policies that we have seen across the world. Allowing actually refugees to work, to own land, and to move freely within the country. This approach has led to the self-reliance of those refugees who have started businesses that have not only created jobs for their fellow refugees, but for local Ugandans as well, and have contributed to boosting the local economies. This approach of both Moldova and Uganda has empowered these refugees to contribute back to their host communities, reducing their dependence on humanitarian aid and fostering their economic self-reliance, serving truly as a model for our conversations today, as well as other efforts across the world. So to our dignitaries here today representing Moldova and Uganda, thank you again for your leadership on these issues and for your inspiration to the broader global community. There is so much to learn from this, and we look forward to discussing these best practices today. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Beckering, for those remarks. And now I am going to introduce the award and the awardees. As mentioned, Moldova, let me start with Moldova. In response to the Ukrainian refugee fleeing the Russian war of aggression, Moldova recognized both the humanity and talents of refugees in welcoming them. Moldova hosts one of the highest number of refugees per capita in Europe, and it empowers them to rebuild their livelihoods. A recent report by the International Organization for Migration found that 64% of displaced Ukrainians in Moldova were employed, with 81% working in jobs matching their backgrounds, and 72% generating sufficient income to cover basic expenses. This is a monumental achievement for Moldova, a small and poor country with a big heart. Uganda has been described as one of the best places for refugees because of its policy that gives refugees access to land and livelihood opportunities. Pope Francis lauded the self-reliance model for allowing refugees to, quote, rebuild their lives in security and to sense the dignity which comes from earning one's livelihood through honest labor, end quote. This approach is based on shared responsibility and shared opportunity that has led to a refugee community which contributes positively to the national economy. While the presence of more than 1.7 million refugees has overstretched the capacity of an already resource-thin country, Uganda still remains a leader in hosting the refugee population in Africa. For the aforementioned reasons, the Wilson Center Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative is pleased to present the Refugee Host Country Leadership Award to these two countries in recognition of their exemplary leadership, not only in hosting refugees, but also ensuring their self-reliance. To present the award is the Senior Vice President at the Wilson Center, Dr. Robert Lidwak, and to receive the award on behalf of their respective countries is Ambassador Ursu of the Republic of Moldova and Her Excellency Robbie Kangongwe, the Ambassador of Uganda to the United States. And now I call to the podium Dr. Lidwak to present the award. And then I call Ambassador of Moldova, Ambassador Ursu, to come and receive the award. And written in the award is, the name of the award is Host Country Leadership Award. Next, I call upon the Ambassador of the Republic of Uganda, Ambassador Kagonge, to receive the award on behalf of our country. Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you all. And now the floor will be to the two recipients to have their remarks. And I am going to introduce Ambassador Viral Ursu of the Republic of Moldova to the United States. Before assuming his current duties, Ambassador Ursu served as Division Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Open Society Foundation in London, UK. Ursu spent a decade in Brussels, Belgium, as a senior policy analyst on European Union enlargement and foreign affairs. Prior to his move abroad, he was a lecturer of international law and human rights at the Moldova State University, where he graduated in 1997. Ambassador Ursu, few remarks. Welcome to the podium.
Thank you. I feel a bit emotional receiving awards, and great to see so many people showing up. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's of course a privilege for me to stand before you today and accept this prestigious award, Refugee Host Country Leadership Award on behalf of the Moldovan government. And I extend my sincere thank you to the Wilson Center Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative, and of course to its director, John Ton, for this recognition. While I may be the one receiving this award and this recognition, first and foremost, I think this belongs to the Moldovan people. From the very first day, and as you mentioned, of the Russian war against Ukraine, our citizens, Moldovan citizens, opened their doors and houses and also their hearts to the fleeing violence and destruction. They shared their homes, food, and resources with complete strangers, not out of obligation, but out of the instinctive sense of solidarity, humanity, and doing what is right. And this award is a testimony to their unwavering compassion and generosity. I'm especially proud to represent the Republic of Moldova, a small country with a big heart, the way you mentioned. It's always been called after an article in the New York Times after the first days of the Russian aggression against the Ukraine. We might be a small country, but our response has been of big leadership, big responsibility, and big heart. We recognized early on that ensuring the Ukrainian guests' self-reliance, not just their survival, was the key to effective and dignified response. Through access to legal employment, education, healthcare, and essential services, Moldova has given place to displaced Ukrainians not only a safe haven, but also the tools to rebuild their lives. The Republic of Moldova has faced one of the largest waves of immigration in Europe, probably is the highest per capita in Europe. Just to give you some references, about approximately 200,000 of Ukrainians crossed our border just in the first 2 months of the war alone. And in total, over 1.4 million of Ukrainians have transited the country. It's a country of 2.4 million population. So, and over 135,000 of Ukrainians are still in Moldova, and they've been at any given time. Just to give you a perspective of the scale, this would be an equivalent for the United States hosting about 200 million of refugees crossing slowly its territory towards Canada. That's the entire population of Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela together. And about 20 million of those crossing would stay in the US at any given time. And it would have probably created a huge burden even for a wealthy country like the United States. And while US has a long history of welcoming immigrants, Moldova has never been a destination country for immigration. It has rather seen a huge immigration outflow itself, losing about a third of our population since the independence 33 years ago. We know Moldova is not a perfect place for many of these families. We feel the constraint of our own situation, the pressure of a small country carrying an immense responsibility. There are many challenges on the way, of course. Besides the scale and the demographic of the inflow, for instance, the linguistic distinction, the Ukrainian and Romanian language are very different languages, made integration particularly difficult. Almost everyone remaining in Moldova today are either women, children, or the elderly. As you know, men were not allowed to leave Ukraine. And most of these women are also carers for the young and for the elder and their families, which limits their ability to integrate the labor market. Still, the Moldovan government, working side by side with the international development partners, with the private sector, civil society, thousands of volunteers, has done everything in its power to provide safety, stability, and opportunity for those who wanted either to cross or stay in Moldova. The parliament adopted early on the temporary protection mechanism based on a similar model by the European Union, which basically guaranteed unrestricted access to labor market, healthcare, social protection, education, and public services for everyone. And hosting refugees is not just an act of charity. It's in also our national interest. Firstly, we see it as an act of duty towards the brave Ukrainians who are not only defending their land, but they are also guaranteeing Moldova's defense against a common aggressor. Secondly, welcoming and integrating those in need makes our country stronger. When refugees are given opportunities, they become contributors, not just the beneficiaries of our communities. It enriches our economy, our culture, and our collective resilience. But we, of course, cannot do it alone, and we relied a lot and received support from the international partners, governments, organizations, foundations, institutions, including like Wilson Center. It was critical to ensure that Moldova and other host nations can sustain this effort. Moldova can be a small country, but our experience showed that leadership is not measured by size or wealth. It is measured by values, action, and the impact on the people that in needs. And as we continue this conversation today, I urge all of us to think boldly about how we can build a future where no country and no person is left to face these challenges alone. And once again, thank you for this award, and thank you for all who stands with Ukraine and Moldova in this essential mission. Mulțumesc.
Thank you. Now I am going to introduce Her Excellency Robbie Kakonge, the Ambassador of Uganda to the United States. She is a non-resident ambassador to several Latin American and Caribbean countries, including Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and others. She's also assigned to major international organizations such as the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and International Telecommunication Satellite Organization. Her extensive diplomatic portfolio highlights her significant contribution to international relations, economic development, and global cooperation. Ambassador Kakonge, welcome to the podium.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I really just want to say asante sana, mwebale muno. Thank you very much. It's been a long journey, and as John, you mentioned that there are crossroads in life, and sometimes when you get to those crossroads, you really have no clue what to do. And Uganda found itself and continues to find itself at the crossroads. When you are a landlocked country, you soon realize that you're actually a land-linked country. And when you have had experiences of your own where you've sought refuge in other places, we've had wars in Uganda, we've had different situations, it only becomes part and parcel of the humanity that, Ambassador, you spoke about. You really don't see other nations. What you see are people. And it just so happens that we're a blessed country, and farming is a key resource for us. We are subsistent farmers. And even when you host people in your home, I think one of the greatest concerns is that after they stay a month, a year, what will you feed them? And how will you care for them? So that we are farmers, the natural thing was to say to them, you're not beggars. You can work with your hands. Here's some land where you can stay. You can grow your food, and what you grow, we can all share. So that kept the communities busy. It kept them not demoralized. It gave them their humanity because they could do something as we were all doing something for each other. So to that extent, it really, it made a difference. You may hear a bit of an American accent on my side, and that's because I have lived half my life here and half my life in Uganda. And I came here in the 70s when Uganda was under extremely difficult circumstances with the war, but those are things past. So I had a few milkshakes and hamburgers, and my tongue twisted a bit. But to say that we are grateful for this opportunity is an understatement. So allow me to read my statement. And this is to our host, Mr. John Thorne, and to the Wilson Center, the Refugee and Forced Displacement Initiative. Honorable Michelle, thank you very much. My colleague ambassador of Moldova, thank you. Members of the Wilson Center, colleagues and fellow participants, we really want to thank you for taking your time for coming here this afternoon. On behalf of Uganda, allow me to extend our deepest appreciation to the Wilson Center for coming up with this award that recognizes the contribution of countries that host refugees. Insignificant as it may sound, this event has a potential to unlock opportunities for many citizens of the world who are vulnerable. In this regard, I commend you, Mr. Thorne, for the initiative. As many of you are aware, Uganda currently hosts nearly 2 million refugees and almost 40,000 asylum seekers. And when you look at the size of Uganda, we are approximately the size of the state of Oregon, and our population is 45 million. So that is where we're hosting these 2 million people. Oregon is one of the smallest states in the U.S. This is a significant population, and many of them are extremely vulnerable as they are victims of war and conflicts. 54% are from South Sudan, 31% from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the numbers are increasing as the country continues to experience instability in the eastern part. The rest are from Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, Burundi, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, among others. I'm aware that the choice of Uganda as one of the best refugee host country was informed by a range of parameters and actions that the government of Uganda has deliberately implemented to better the lives and the refugees of asylum seekers. I'm glad that these efforts are being recorded and recognized by the international community. This award is also a reflection of the able leadership of His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda, and also the Prime Minister Nabanja, who oversees the refugee sector in Uganda. And again, through the current leadership, we've experienced such peace and security that we're actually the security anchor in the region. Because when you're seeking peace and when you're seeking refuge, the place you're going to has got to be safe and secure. As I accept this award on behalf of my president and the people of Uganda who graciously host our brothers and sisters in the region during their difficult times, may they always know that Uganda is a home away from home. Allow me to convey the commitment of the government of Uganda and to do more within the means to better the lives of these refugees. This is demonstrated by the 5 pledges Uganda made at the Global Refugee Forum in 2023, namely, increasing resilience and self-reliance in that sharing land and farming and animals. Secondly, taking actions against climate change, because when there's so many factors in terms of farming, especially when it comes to farming, there are times where certain parts of the country will get a bit drier, the seasons will change. So we've got to also see how to better adapt to that. And then localizing the refugee response, usually locally available means and solutions. So in essence, what we do for Ugandans, we also do for them. The educational system that we have, they also share the same. The health facilities that we have, they also share the same. Building durable solutions, and then making sure that these resources are equitably managed. These pledges were based on the experience Uganda has in hosting refugees and recognition of the unique role Uganda will continue to play in global refugee management, taking into account its location and conducive political, socioeconomic, and natural environment. And mind you, Ugandans have been mentioned to be among the friendliest people in the world. So it's also good to be hosted by people who are friendly, and our climate is equally friendly. When winter comes here, I'm like, oh, I can survive another day. But usually our temperatures may be like 80 degrees year-round, and we only have 2 seasons. So it's either raining or the sunshine is there. So you're either planting or you're harvesting. With these remarks, I therefore accept the Refugee Host Country Leadership Award on behalf of my people. And thank you, John. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, the Wilson Center. Thank you, all of you. And I know that your circumstances are not that you're refugees, but I do welcome you to visit Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kakonga. We are now going to have a panel discussion. So in addition to the two ambassadors, we have two other speakers, and so I will call them, all of you, to the stage, and I will introduce you as you come. So Dr. Danny Bahar, Dr. Katarina Smagli, Ambassador Ursu, Ambassador Kakonga. I already introduced the two ambassadors, so let me start with Dr. Danny Bahar, who is the Director of Migration, Displacement, and Humanitarian Policy, and also a Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development. Dr. Bahar and I have known each other when the initiative was launched. This Rabdi, it was in Los Angeles, and he was one of the first speakers that was on the panel. So I'm delighted that you are here again as we do this host country celebration. Dr. Bahar is an economist by training. And again, I'm not going to read all the bio. And he has a BA in systems engineering and MA in economics from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, MPA in international development from Harvard Kennedy School, and a PhD in public policy from Harvard University. So he's going to bring that research perspectives about the economy of refugees to host countries. Next to him is Dr. Katrina Smagli, who has kindly stepped in because the deputyship of mission of the Embassy of Ukraine was going to be the one on the panel today, but of course you know what is going on around the world. So he got called to another meeting and she stepped in. Dr. Smagli is a counselor for political affairs and public diplomacy at the Embassy of Ukraine. And she has been kindly in communication regarding this event, and I'm glad she stepped in. She worked for the embassy in Kyiv as the principal liaison officer with Ukraine's parliament. Parallel to her diplomatic career, Dr. Smagli served as associate professor at Donetsk National University named after Tus and the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. She is a Fulbright scholar and a graduate of McCain Institute Next Generation Leaders Program. Thank you. And thank you to the two ambassadors. So let me begin the conversation. And first, Dr. Bahar, I'm going to ask you, we are in a celebration mode because we are celebrating the achievement of two host countries. And in the report, Post-Migration and Refugees, Policies for Successful Economic and Social Integration, the report you co-author, you identify 5 key integration policies. Briefly, could you share some of the successful refugee integration policies that address both the concern of the host community and the need of refugees? Welcome.
Thank you, John Thon, and thank you, everybody. And it's really, I'm humbled to share the stage with all of you and your excellencies, and congratulations on the award. Extremely well-deserved, giving an example to the world on how to do effective policy. And I'll start a little bit with that comment, which is, as you, Ambassador, also said, this is not about a big heart only, but it's about smart brains. And it's the fact that it's recognizing the idea, and speaking here from the research perspective, there's not such a thing as a bad immigrant or a bad refugee, but there's bad policies that are keeping immigrants and refugees from integrating and successfully contributing. And you know, the research is very vast, and of course, I recognize we have a big problem in translating this research into the public discourse. But the research completely suggests and shows this idea that integrating refugees, in particular, is a key component for further economic growth. And the policies to do that vary in ways. But let me just mention a couple of outcomes that I think are important. One of the things that we've seen in many scenarios is how refugees in particular, and also immigrants at large, can play a huge role in, for instance, expanding the type of products that a country will produce. So I know, Ambassador, Moldova is a strong country when it comes to wine, but I'll give an example of South African wine. And I don't know if you know this story, but there's this little town about 40, I don't know if there's somebody from South Africa here, but 40, 50 kilometers from Cape Town. It's called the Franschhoek Valley. It's a beautiful town where it has some of the most important and renowned wineries of South Africa, exporting wine to the rest of the world. And it was founded by refugee Huguenots who were expelled from France in the 16th century, who settled there, and guess what? They decided, okay, I think we can make wine. We know how to make wine. We can make wine. So a lot of those. This is just an example, which also, by the way, it holds with the very quintessential British dish, fish and chips, which actually was brought to England by Jewish refugees from Portugal. So these are just examples that we also see on the research side, on how refugees, on their good integration policies, they not only integrate in the labor force, but they become entrepreneurs. They can bring the know-how and the knowledge of things that can reshape the structure, the productive structure of countries, which is an essential part of economic growth. Now, of course, for these you need policies, and for decades, we economists, this is a mea culpa, focus so much on the very narrow question on whether immigrants increase wages, lower wages, take jobs, don't take jobs, and we left aside like a whole bunch of super interesting questions, much more important than that ones, on what is the potential for refugees in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation and trade networks and you name it, and even we left even further, what are the effective policies? This is an important conversation because your countries in particular, but also many countries who are hosting refugees, I also did a lot of work on Colombia, are doing this with very limited resources. I documented, and I'll close in a couple of minutes, I documented, for instance, that in the case of Colombia, a Venezuelan refugee in Colombia was receiving about 10 times less funding from the international community than the average Syrian refugee was receiving at the time of the crisis. So we can make the same calculations, and I bet we'll see a lot of disparity on that. So therefore, it's very important to think not only about policies that are effective, but also policies that are scalable. So in that sense, you mentioned some of the challenges, and for instance, we found that language trainings are particularly effective, not only because it gives the ability of the immigrants the refugees to learn the local language, but also provides them with a network of people that can really help them integrate and find jobs. Now, finding jobs is hard for all of us, right? So imagine how it is for a refugee that doesn't even have the network to do. So those concepts are very important. Another, I think, promising policy, I'll just do a couple more, is one that is really, we're still trying to understand better, but it's this idea of private sponsorships. And I think you mentioned also in your countries how de facto this happened with private citizens starting to open the doors. And I think this is a very cost-effective policy because it's really, reducing significantly the burden from the government on the investment and putting it on citizens that want to do it. But it's not only about the money; it's also about, again, a mentor, a local mentor who can help these refugees thrive and do the private sector. Overall, the last one, which I want to mention, given that we're government officials, is the importance, and this is another huge lesson from your country, is the importance of providing refugees a legal status, the ability of free movement, the ability to enter the labor force wherever they are. Because migrants and refugees have one characteristic that makes them unique from all other populations, which is they are risk takers. And risk takers is an excellent skill for people who want to be entrepreneurs, for people who want to move to another city within the country and look for a job. But for that to happen, people need to understand that they can appropriate the returns of their own investments, their investments in time, in money. So just giving them the certainty that, hey, you're welcome and you can stay here for as long as you want, provides them an avenue to invest in themselves and appropriate those investments that at the end creates opportunity for local economic growth, more jobs for locals, not only for the refugees, in a way that is a win-win situation. In the next round, John, if you allow me, I will also talk a little bit about how this is important not only for the countries who are hosting, but also for the countries who are sending the refugees.
Thank you. And that's a good transition. I'm now going to the sending country, Ukraine. Katja, last month or around this now, is the third anniversary of the ongoing war that has forcibly displaced millions of Ukrainians from their home. What is the current state of forced displacement in Ukraine? You can talk about how many IDPs and the ratio of male, female, and children to adults, so that the outsiders can understand the dynamics of Ukraine forced displacement. Welcome.
Thank you very much, John, for your kind introduction, for the invitation. It's a great honor to be back to the Wilson Center. You mentioned in the introductory remarks that I hold the title of a Fulbright scholar, and you didn't mention that I actually spent my Fulbright research here at the Wilson Center as a Fulbright Canon scholar 10 years ago. So it's always wonderful to be back and to be in the company of two distinguished ambassadors. And my very sincere congratulations to both of you, Ambassador Kakonga, Ambassador Villarreal Ursu, who is a dear friend and colleague, with this distinguished award that you have received on behalf of your governments today. Having said how happy I am to be here, I also have to say how sad I am for the reason that Ukraine is present at this table, because as you just mentioned, we are now entering the fourth year since Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine started in February 2022, and with illegal annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass 11 years before that. Certainly, it was the largest displacement crisis in Europe, triggering a regional refugee response of unprecedented scale. I believe everyone in this audience remembers the horrific images of the border with Poland and the thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees who were trying to enter Poland in the very first days of Russian aggression. Statistics says that in the first 3 days, Poland received more than 115,000 Ukrainian refugees. So since the Russian Federation's full-scale invasion, over 6.8 million refugees from Ukraine have been recorded globally, with the overwhelming majority, and this is 92%, seeking safety in Europe. Among those are 16% of children, 6% of people with disabilities, 63% of women and girls, and 37% of men and boys. Now, the problem right now is that we don't only have Ukrainian refugees who left the territory of Ukraine, but who are also internally displaced. And this number is also huge. We have 4.6 million Ukrainians who are officially registered as internally displaced persons. And those are 60% of them are women, and almost 1 million of them are children. I would like to thank the U.S. government for warmly welcoming Ukrainian refugees since the first day of Russia's full-scale aggression. Right now in the United States, we have almost 300,000 Ukrainians who are registered by two different programs, U4U and Temporary Protected Status Program. But certainly you can see the discrepancy in numbers. So if we have 6.8 million people in Europe, and 300,000 people in the United States, it means that the European Union provides a significantly higher support of Ukrainians who currently live there. And of course, we are thankful to all our international partners for continuous support of Ukrainians who still have to stay there because the war is ongoing. And although a lot of Ukrainians returned since the hot stage of the war, so to say, has ended, but the UNHCR reports demonstrate that the war remains the most significant barrier for people to return.
Thank you. That was brief and to the, the numbers there and the ratio in particular. To the two ambassadors, while we are celebrating the leadership of the two countries, we understand there are challenges. And this is an audience of international, global community that you can share those challenges with. Host country governments, especially low income and middle income, face double squeeze. On the one hand, they have to provide for their citizens' need. They have to deliver. On the other hand, they also have international obligations to provide for refugees. And so what are some of the challenges as a host country that the outsiders should know and maybe drawing from the success factors, which you have already alluded in your remarks and Danny talk about. Tell us, and let me start with Ambassador Kakonge, what are some of the main challenges in hosting refugees that the outside world should know?
Thank you once again. First of all, when people come from conflict, and even in the process of settling somewhere, and there's so many, that alone has another element of conflict because they're under a great deal of distress, and usually they don't know how long they're going to stay. So one of the things that they say prevention is better than cure was to say, okay, let them not be encamped. Mm-hmm. So the challenge itself was, how do you have these people from different nations? They're not from one country, but sometimes they're from, we have 5 neighbors, sometimes they're beyond those neighbors. So when you have refugees that are from more than 5 countries at a time, and sometimes these countries are in conflict with each other, where they're coming from. So how do you begin to provide a place where they can settle? And one of those things was to make sure that they're not encamped. But also, how are they going to, the challenge is how do you maintain their well-being, And a great deal of it has stemmed from what Danny was saying, in that the challenge when your own envelope is thin, how do you extend this envelope to help others? So the other challenge, we said, okay, how can they begin to work with the community and to add value to not only what they're doing, but also again, the enterprising component of it, because the challenge would have been to now find jobs for these people and for these refugees. And when, like right now, Uganda, 70% of our population is under 30 years old. So even we are struggling with creating jobs for our own population. But when they're not encamped, when they are making their own food and creating different opportunities for them, not only are they employed, but they now employ others on a small scale, but they employ others. So those are the challenges that we found, and those were some of the solutions that we felt could be of help.
Thank you. And Ambassador, also the same question. Despite the size of Moldova and you are hosting a significant number of refugees, what are some of the challenges that others should know?
In preparation for this conversation, I actually called yesterday Natalia Gavrilidze. She was the prime minister at the time when the war started, exactly asking her, because she was really the main decision maker on many of this on this situation. And at that moment, Moldova was facing multiple crises. The inflow of refugees was one of them, but it was also the hybrid war aggression of Russia against Moldova, which weaponized energy, for instance. Moldova doesn't have such a kind climate as in Uganda, so we have harsh winters, and that was in the middle of the winter. Russia has also cut the gas supply that we use for heating our homes. We also have the economic downturn. I know you had a huge inflation here in the US. Our inflation was 36% that time. So the energy, the electricity, heating bills increased sevenfold. So you also had a local population in dire needs. And then you have all the others, is interference into election, disinformation. So there are multiple crises and challenges. But when it comes to specifically hosting the Ukrainian guests, I think I agree. One of the main challenges was about the uncertainty about the war trajectory. These people were coming without knowing, and we wouldn't know when and how long this conflict, the war will last. And these people didn't know if they want to settle in, they want to move on. So that uncertainty you have to incorporate into the policies, and I think I completely agree. When I asked Natalia what was one of the success factors, she said it was exactly working on the policy contingency planning. Though we didn't have a lot of heads up about the war, though the Americans started already shouting quite loud early in autumn, the government did have that 3 months period of building the contingency planning, which I thought was very useful. That's what she was telling me about building those coordination. Was a special commission for exceptional circumstances that the government were gathering daily, and every minister was having homework to do for the next day to report how they're going to prepare the infrastructure, logistics for hosting the refugees. Another big challenge was the one I mentioned, is access to education. So taking into consideration the demographics, more than half of them are children. You want to make sure that they continue having access to education, and that's the language barriers. Those where we also rely on civil society organization to provide all those kind of integration services. And of course, women, many of them are women. It's not just women, that they were carers for the elderly and the young. Is making sure that you provide those facilities, and again, with civil society, with the government, providing facilities for caring for children and elderly so women can integrate better into the labor market. Those are just the few challenges. Of course, the list was much longer.
Yeah, thank you. And Danny, back to you now. Despite these challenges, these two countries have demonstrated leadership and somehow managed. So my question to you, while forced displacement numbers have been trending up over the last several decades, three facts remain constant over time. One, majority of refugees are hosted in low and middle income countries. Two, most refugees stay closer to home, and that is in the neighboring countries. And then three, more than half of the more than 43 million refugees are in what is called a protracted situation, that they have stayed in camps or in host countries for at least 5 years or more. From your research analysis, what lesson can high-income countries learn from these low and middle-income countries about hosting refugees?
I love your question because I'm the only non-diplomat in the panel, so I will take advantage and say a non-diplomatic thing, which is the humility and the evidence-based policymaking of your countries on this topic. It's so inspiring to understand what you were saying, Ambassador, that these people are coming in a very distressed situations, and it's not only about the technically correct policy, but about acknowledging that and in your case, like showing how, you know, what you said about ministers working day and night to try to get it right. And I just want to just put up my non-diplomatic comparison here, which is like Moldova is a country with a GDP of $16.5 billion. Uganda is a country with a GDP of $50 billion. But when 10,000 refugees from Venezuela came to New York City, a city that has a GDP, only the city, of $1.3 trillion, the mayor of New York freaked out. And he said, we have a crisis. 10,000 people came. And I was like, well, Mr. Mayor, have you ever been to New York, to Times Square on Wednesday at 11 a.m.? And these countries receive millions of people with open arms and work day and night. So I think that humility and that understanding of standing to the moment with few resources is such an inspiration to policymakers in the world and to researchers to understand beyond numbers how you did this. So I think you know, the lessons are there right now on how they did it, but I think the lessons on the fruits that he's going to bring to the countries and their economies we're just getting started. And this is something I'd love to study more on your countries. I've done a lot of work, for instance, in Colombia, where we've shown, which is another country that I think has a very interesting history of dealing with Venezuelan refugees. I'm Venezuelan originally. And for instance, there we learned that the massive effort of the government, the previous government of President Duque, who's a fellow here in the Wilson Center, of providing a legal status to Venezuelans, we found resulted in three interesting outcomes in the short to medium term. First of all, there was no adverse effects on the local labor markets. So this story that, you know, you give a refugee a right to work is going to displace, that's not how the economy works, right? Because the economy is not just one apple that if I eat it, you cannot eat it. The economy, where the labor market is a set of complementary occupations, and a doctor needs a nurse, and the nurse needs a truck driver, and the truck driver needs a dentist. So the idea like refugees can add to these massive complementary links that is the economy, it's obviously there, and that's why we see those results. Second, we saw an interesting story on female empowerment. So which are these things that maybe are hard to measure for an economist, but we still see a very interesting scenario. Colombia, you know, for instance, crime is a very, very concerned in some of these countries. We found that that after giving a legal status to Venezuelan immigrants, we saw an increase not on crimes, but in the reporting of crimes, especially by female immigrants, on crimes that refer to domestic violence and sexual crimes. So these women feel more empowered to go to the authorities without the fear that they're going to be deported and report those crimes against them. So I think that that's a very powerful story. And lastly, something I mentioned this morning, and John Thon knows about this work, is economic growth and entrepreneurship. And what we found is that after giving these immigrants a regular status, their rate of entrepreneurship increased by a factor of 10. So, and these are firms that are formally registered in the Colombian Business Registry in a country which I think sometimes could share similarities in a country where the informal markets are not small. So just the idea that there is a creation of firms that are formal firms, which pay taxes, which create jobs, I think is a fantastic example of how policy can really make the whole difference.
Well, thanks. Kacha, and we are zooming in because time, and we want to see if there are minutes left, we can get a question from the audience. But what is your one advice or recommendation to the international community on how to address the root causes of forced displacement? Because people see the manifestation of a bigger issue. We react to the symptom, and that is the immediate aftermath of any conflict or war or persecution is that people are forced to leave their homes. So how do we address those factors at the root? What is your one or two advice to the international community on how to address the root cause?
Janton, you know that I'm not an expert on refugee crisis, and the only thing that I can comment is the resolution of the situation that we are in, Ukraine. You understand that as long as the Russian aggression going on against Ukraine, we won't be able to resolve the refugee situation, and our people will not return, because even as we speak, the Russian Federation continues throwing bombs on our heads and missile attacks almost daily. On February 5th, for example, there was another missile attack on the city of Kryvyi Rih, killing 5 civilians, injuring 30 people. And by the way, those were the volunteers from the United States, from the Great Britain, and other European countries who came to the city of Kryvyi Rih to provide humanitarian support to people in crisis. They just checked into the hotel, the civilian object, and immediately the Russian missile hit them, unfortunately taking 5 innocent lives. And these attacks happen on a daily basis. So for us, this event is an opportunity to thank all our partners, all our European partners, the United States of America, Canada, Mexico, other states which accepted Ukrainian refugees, which provided them with various services, including mental health services. And you remember that those children and women who were fleeing Ukraine, some of them were subjected to torture, rape, physical abuse, and there were a lot of people in need of psychological support and still are. Organizing school classes, especially in Poland, where you still have 1 million Ukrainians officially registered. Poland, again, took an opportunity and hired a lot of Ukrainian teachers who came to Poland and created special classes for Ukrainian children, ensuring that they stay connected with their country. And it's a point that I want to underscore, because you understand that for any person who was forced to leave his or her country, it is extremely important to preserve his or her national identity, and this is particularly important for young children who may even forget the language. You know, if you are staying abroad for a number of years, certainly there is a certain disconnect with the country that you were forced to flee. So our strong request to the countries which still host Ukrainians is to ensure that in addition to the curricula they receive in the communities they are currently in, that they still are given an opportunity to have classes in Ukrainian language, classes in Ukrainian literature, history, so they understand and stay connected to Ukraine. Of course, the extremely important element is the legal status. And once again, I'd like to thank our neighbor, Moldova, for hosting so many Ukrainians and adopting among the first countries in Europe the special legislative act, which ensured that Ukrainians will not only be there safely protected, but they will be entitled and eligible for employment, giving them a greater sense of security, dignity, because you don't have to feel yourself as someone who is begging for support, because Ukrainians are highly educated people who can contribute to economies of the countries which host them. So once again, thank you for this opportunity, and to maybe come back to the question that you asked, how to ensure that we have less number of refugees in the world. In our case, again, these refugees became refugees not because of the political situation in Ukraine, not because we have a dictatorial government, not because they were running away from some forms of political pressure and persecution. They fled because there was a country who is an aggressor and who continues this unjustifiable, brutal aggression against our nation.
Thank you. And again, it's good to underscore that, yes, Ukraine has no civil war. It's external aggression war, unlike other countries with civil war that drive. And this is where Ambassador Kakonge, the root causing, because when your neighbor house catch fire, you know that it can come to you if it is not controlled. So addressing, find ways to address that is something that the international community in general, but the neighbors should think about. But let me switch gears here. What has been the role of the diaspora in the socio-economic development of host country, in this case Uganda, and how that impact the self-reliant initiative that the country has already ensured, whether it's the Ugandan diaspora or those refugees from the neighboring countries in Uganda, also helping in terms of socio-economic development, but also in terms of bringing stability. What has been the role of diaspora? You spoke highly about that in your remarks previously. So,
okay. Let me first say that when there's war does not know education or not education. You know, when war breaks out, it's really sometimes the people, all they have is what they have on the back of their clothes. So when we get to the diaspora in Uganda's situation, when you look at their remittances exceed FDI, foreign direct investment. So already for our country, we see that not only do they have, do they play a key role, and those remittances go mainly towards education and social services for their relatives and for the country. But we also look at, if you look at the Organization of International Migration, they work in Uganda, and many of our neighbors who have come to the US and other places, they were processed through that system. So it is not unlikely that when, even in DC, when I'm around and somebody will say, "Where are you from?" and I'll say Uganda. And it actually turns out that in Africa, Uganda was the last place where they were in Africa. So you find that there's a great deal of fraternal and a connection there. Even when they're here as a diaspora, you find that there's a tendency to, when they do become successful, we have many investors in Uganda. Some of our investors are from our neighbors, you know, and they've come back because, again, of the stability and being the security anchor in the region. It is a place where they found that they can invest small businesses, invest in real estate. So we're cognizant of the role the diaspora plays in terms of entrepreneurship and the economy and lending to the economy.
thank you. And I assume it's the same thing, Ambassador Ursu, in terms of Moldova diaspora. So let me ask you the private sector question. How can or how should the private sector, or how is the private sector now helping refugees in Moldova to unlock their potential and be sustainably contributing to the economy of the nation? What has been the role of private sector?
I think I will repeat myself or reiterate that I don't think the government would have been able to manage the whole crisis without the input from the private sector, civil society. And with the private sector, from the beginning, from the first day, what really worked is the enterprises providing those immediate response, including transportation of refugees from the border to the homes or to the other border, moving to the Europe. Government didn't have the capacity to do all the logistics of it, so a lot of it was kind of outsourced, or that's where the private sector took over some of those responsibilities, including managing the warehouses. Our diaspora as well, and international community, has been sending a lot of donations. The money that were fundraised, including goods for the refugees, it was the private sector that were managing these logistics and the warehouses. Again, the companies have been fundraising on their own and providing the donation. And later, of course, they were the one offering the employment opportunities for the refugees. And I like your analogy about that economy is not an apple. And I think we saw that. We saw that actually by creating those jobs, you make that apple bigger. It's not actually sharing. And in Moldova in particular, the Ukrainians, and Katya, you mentioned, the profile of many of the Ukrainian refugees in Moldova were highly educated people who came. And Moldova, the wine sector is one of the biggest one, but actually a much bigger growing sector is the IT sector in Moldova. And the reason is we have a very easy, facilitated model for IT companies in Moldova, which is one single tax, 7% that covers, which very easy to register. And that's why we've seen a big growing. And what we've noticed, the new resident of that IT park, when the biggest growing number were of Ukrainian companies and entrepreneurs that actually registered in that park that has this facility. Many of course, because of the proximity, many of the Ukrainian companies also moved their staff to Moldova, particularly in the IT sector. And in the last 3 years, we saw, again, a continuation of the growing sector of IT. A lot of that growth, the apple growing, is also due to Ukrainian refugees.
Thanks to.
Yes, thanks to. Sorry.
Well, thank you. This is a public forum, and so I would like to get at least one question from the audience. And recognizing the fact that we are in a conversation with foreign diplomats, and so the question you would ask would be about their country. And of course, we have an economist here, so any question about
Non-diplomatic
society
question for me.
would be here. But a burning question, a question that may not have been asked or you really want to ask. Okay, so identify yourself and then ask the question or comment. I see.
Dave Onspach, not affiliated. This is sort of a controversial question, so bear with me. Does it make practical and humane sense to forcibly deport migrants who are queer or LGBTQ to countries like Uganda, knowing Uganda's laws and attitudes about queer persons? And if such persons, is there a way so that if such persons in Uganda, would your country choose to punish such persons directly there, or allow them safe passage to a more accepting country? How would you handle that? Because there are such persons out there. Thank you.
Okay.
Sergey Zhuk, Wilson Center Fellow, and I have a question for everybody, including non-diplomatic scholar. In the new situation in the world, when American international assistance to refugees is cutting, probably you remember you had USAID funds in both Uganda and Moldova. But in this new situation, when we have these rumors that Ukrainian refugees could be kicked out from the United States, I don't know if it's true or not, but we have these rumors. We have not rumors, but facts that United States cut help, aids to refugees all over the place. So in this situation, my question is, especially the non-diplomatic, how you would react, how you would involve local resources, local initiatives to replace money from Big Brother. Thank you.
Okay. I'm coming back to the speakers. Regarding the Ugandan policy, you may not answer it because if it's not unless the queers are refugees, but if it's a general policy, you have that opportunity and be brief in answering it too, if you choose to. In terms of the general question for the panelists, you can be very brief, or one of you can answer that question about what else can you do in place of the foreign aid in terms of refugee funding.
All right. First and foremost, I would want to make it categorically clear in that homosexuality is not new in Uganda. It is there, it has been there, and it will continue to be there. We are not against anyone. We are a conservative country. So conservative are we that there is no Ugandan who has ever witnessed our president kissing his lawfully wedded wife in public. PDA is not part of our culture. And promotion of certain ideas, especially for people who are 18 and younger, it's not what we want. Only 2 members of what you call here, I think maybe the Congress, only 2 members did not vote for this. This is the voice of the people. We're not against anyone. We have a constitution that protects everybody. But we're also now going to be in a position where our culture, which we intend to preserve, and I think in this panel we talked about culture, and we want to retain it, and we should be able to do that, and we're going to do that. And we are very in tune, and we've heard it loud and clear from the current administration in where they stand in some of these considerations and culture. And we're glad that somebody has said that indeed, if you choose to preserve your culture, it is our privilege to do so. So I think that is as diplomatic as that can be, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I will give that question, Danny, to you. Where is the common ground? Let's say that, because the question about foreign assistance to refugee funding.
I mean, it's a great question because we are such in turbulent times that we don't really know where the ship is going to arrive to. But I will say that it's going to be a moment of a lot of creativity, going back to the drawing board with what we know, trying to think about policies that give the biggest bang for the buck, as we have talked. I think it's going to be a period of relying, of course, more on other places and also multilateral banks, to the extent that they're also not affected, which is still a big question. But also 2 silver linings, trying very hard to be optimistic. One is that, ironically, sometimes some of the most expensive policies that are put in place are bad policies. For instance, holding refugee camps. And we know, specifically in the case of Uganda, the importance of free mobility that allows people to adjust in terms of the labor markets better, which if you are compounded to a refugee camp, that's so to the extent that this new scenario will also, I'm not saying this is the ideal way of doing it, but to the extent, we could see some benefits of eliminating policies that countries have put just out of, without a lot of evidence and out of trying to kind of separate the populations. And the second one, which is, of course, a big question, I'll just put the question out there, it's like to what extent we can also leverage technologies at this point. So I think that there's a lot of potential, a lot of hope that a technology like AI, for instance, could play, and there's some research coming out of it, could play a big role on a lot of policies that are helping refugees, like, for instance, that are helping refugees to get mentorship in a way that is scalable, because mentorship is a very expensive thing. But mentorship through AI bots that can help you navigate the local labor markets, that can help you maybe navigate entrepreneurial aspirations. And there is some, and also even education, in the context of education, like help to mentor kids who are going through a different education system. There is some very interesting research showing that mentorship has been shown to be very effective, but it's just not scalable. But with these tools, I think that there's an opening of going back to the drawing board and think like what could be scalable when funding is cut down. So I think it's going to be a tough time, but it will require to go to the drawing board and think creatively.
Okay, thank you. We have 5 minutes, so at least audience, I gave you 2 questions already. So I'm going to have the panel close, unfortunately, and thank you for your patience and to our online audience as well. Katja, what is your message of hope or forward-looking message in 1 minute?
Well, my forward-looking message in answering the tough questions that Dr. Zhuk just put to the panel about the decisions that may affect some of the refugees in this country. You said you were not sure whether this information was true or false. Well, there was an article in Reuters that there might be a decision to revoke the status for temporary protected Ukrainians in Ukraine, which may affect in the United States, which may affect 240,000 Ukrainians. Well, today the White House spokesperson said that those rumors are not true, and that this is not the policy of the current administration, and we hope that it will remain. So, because certainly there are different categories of people who come to the United States with different goals, with different legal statuses. We only can hope that the status of Ukrainian refugees will remain intact for as long as Ukraine continues being a subject of unprovoked attack from Russian Federation. My message of hope is that we believe that President Trump's policy of peace through strength will be successful, and that his administration would be fully successful in its current approach to ensuring that we have long-lasting and just peace in Ukraine restored.
Thank you. Danny, what is the forward-looking message from an economist?
So I have a silver lining message for Ukraine, which is that despite the terrible situation that you've been put in, just to say it mildly, and the invasion and this horrible catastrophe that has essentially created this huge displacement, I think thanks to countries like Moldova, these Ukrainians who fled are going to be the key to the reconstruction of the country. And the better job in integrating them that these countries are doing, the better it's going to be for you. Now, there's this feeling that some countries would say, well, why should we integrate them if they're going to go back? Which is like, I would say, well, a firm, it's the same thought that a firm will say, why would I train my workers if they're going to leave? And I said, well, it's better to have them train and leave than to keep them untrained. So I think Yugoslavia, the countries from the former Yugoslavia, are a great example. About 500,000 Yugoslavian refugees at the time of the war in the 90s left to Germany. They were accepted there, given access to the labor markets. I've studied this in a research paper. When they go back, the industries that outperformed in Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, are in terms of exporting, are the industries where these workers were working at in Germany. So they learned new skills, best practices. They brought knowledge that became essential to the reconstruction. So I think this is a win-win-win situation in a silver lining, and that's my hope for Ukraine.
May I add to this? Thank you, Danny, for this wonderful summary. And let me underscore that Ukraine is very much looking forward to welcoming all people who were forced to live back, because we truly will need them for the rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine. There will be a huge project, and there is several decades probably ahead of us to complete this task. Now, imagine all these people who already spent 3+ years in the European Union, in the United States and Canada, coming back to Ukraine, speaking foreign languages, speaking French, speaking English, speaking Spanish, Moldovan, and only enriching the already very wide tapestry of our cultural heritage. So truly, we once again thank everyone and believe that with Ukrainians coming back with new skills and new knowledge, our country will only be built back better.
Ambassador Kakunge, your last word. We recognize the two countries for their exemplary leadership. What is your message to the international community in 1 minute?
In 1 minute and 1 second, much to your question in that it really is a challenge because already that resource envelope is super thin. So we're having conversations and that this is not where we need to be and to see how better we can do that. You mentioned having your citizens back. In Uganda, we have a policy we allow for dual citizenship for the diaspora. So if you were had been away from home for a very long time, you come to us, home is home, you know. Whether it's 10 years or 2 years or whatever it is, we offer dual citizenship. And then finally, my comment and my statement is this, in that I would like to reassure the world in that there is no one, whatever their sexual orientation is, who's going to be denied to come to Uganda as a refugee simply because of that. You know, we accept, like, especially when it comes to refugees, you know, those really is a situation where, you know, we're not, yeah.
Thank you. Ambassador Wusu, you have the last word. What is your message from a small country of Moldova?
Yeah, first of all, I apologize that I threw so many numbers in my initial remarks about the scale, but my point was that if a country like Moldova, small, not the wealthiest one, a country that never managed an immigration flow, and I think we've done quite well of integrating Ukrainians. So if a country like Moldova can do it, I think any country can really manage well such a potential crisis or dealing with the integration of the migrants. And I think one element which was essential for Moldova is to have that unity, the national unity around hosting Ukrainian guests. We call them even guests, not even refugees. And that requires leadership from the president, parliament, government, political opposition, media, civil society, opinion makers, decision makers, and we did have that in Moldova, despite the attempt by Russia to, with the disinformation, to kind of create those stories that maybe Ukrainians were misbehaving. But again, we managed for all this year to keep that unity. And I think my hope and I think the durable solution for the Ukrainian refugees returning back home is, of course, peace. And we all want peace. We are all hopeful. I know Ukrainians are the one that really wants the most. Moldovans, Europeans, we all want peace. Americans want peace. And I'm hopeful that it's coming.
That is a great message to end it. Peace is coming, and we hope it's coming. I think that's what the world needs right now. So allow me to first of all thank my staff, Joshua and the intern, for their wonderful work, and also thank our co-sponsor for this event, Sorry Union. Nate and his team are in the audience for sponsoring this event. Thank you to the audience online and you, the audience sitting here. And please join me in thanking all our speakers, the keynote and the... Thank you very much for your leadership, the two countries, and congratulations, and to all the speakers for your wisdom. And meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We stand with you.